mistakes. Dan Bennett taught me the skill of not reacting. When you react to a situation, everyone loses. Dr. Gary Brooks taught me that relationships you have with your colleagues will be for a lifetime. Mary Ronan taught me about community and the importance of building community in your school and to be me. Nancy House. Nancy, I want to thank you for showing me the importance of keeping students at the center of every decision and your strong resolve for honoring those decisions. So thank you. I wish my parents could be here this evening. My mother is in a nursing home. She's certainly excited for me, as all mothers would be. And my father is probably looking down on me and likely just as proud. My best friend and my wife, Ann, has been my #1 cheerleader. And she's always supported me in my quest to return to Milford, and I would not be here today without her. And finally, in the interview process, I talked to you about all means all, and I'm really committed to that. I'm committed to all students, families, teachers, staff, and community members so that they all have a voice. I'll work to build relationships with all of our Milford School community stakeholders. Students are our most valuable resource. They're not labels, they're not numbers, they're not defined by a test. And I know that no distance learning program can replace our teachers and the relationships they build with our families. So we must continue to connect before we deliver content, and always remember that relationships are the foundation of all learning. I look forward to having some meet and greets later this summer with the community, and I'm beyond grateful. Thank you again. Thank you. Thank you.
John.
I'm imagining you in a Pope-mobile, like how can you get out of the community, like one of those plexiglass.
John, we're looking forward to it. Again, as Andrea mentioned in her statement, it was an exhaustive process. It was a very, especially considering the time we're in right now, we were able to pull that off, so we get a lot of great candidates. At the end of the day, you were selected, you rose to the top, and we're looking forward to where you're going to take our Milford family next, and very excited about that. I also want to thank our board. I think you guys did a fantastic job of committing to these number of meetings that we needed to get done in order for this process to work and for us to be as informed as possible on our decision. The staff was extremely helpful, especially in our final interview process, which was a logistics challenge. Nancy, you've been great help in terms of helping me guide me through this as a first-time, board member going through this. And specifically Brian. Brian is he's the logistics behind the whole process, and was extremely helpful, especially connecting us with council on several issues as we kind of step through all this together in very unusual times. So I want to thank everybody, and even our teams that you got a chance to interview for our building principals, our community groups, really stepped up, spent a lot of time, and were extremely helpful, and their opinions mattered greatly. So again, thank you and congratulations. Okay, we're going to move on to the Treasurer's Report. Treasurer Brian Rabe.
Thank you, Mr. Ham. Recommend approval of item A, the financial reports ending May 31st, 2000. Item B, temporary appropriations for fiscal year 2021. Item C, final appropriations for fiscal year 2020. Item D, the approval of the annual contract for services with the Hamilton County Claremont Cooperative. And item E, the approval of advances of $150,000 from the general fund to the extended day fund.
Could you talk a little bit about items D and E?
Yes. So item D, this is the annual contract that we have with the Hamilton County Cooperative. What this is the computer services that we have. So, for example, all the student software of tracking students, the financial packages that we have, it's all housed as a third party. So basically, we don't have to worry about updating software. We don't have to worry about issues that may arise. It's all handled outside. Obviously, there's a cost savings in there because all districts feed into that through one group. So this is the annual contract that we have with them to handle those services. And then item E, Obviously, with the closure of schools, two of the biggest, hardest impacted is food service and extended day. Extended day took a significant hit with the closures because obviously we continued to pay their staff, but there was no revenue coming in. So right at the end of May, they ended with a cash balance of about $5,000. So this advance is basically to get them through the end of the fiscal year here, June 30th, till we get into July, and then obviously they would gradually pay that back to the district. It is an advance, it's not a transfer, so it's the way to think about it, it's a loan that they'll eventually have to pay back to the general fund, but obviously they took a significant financial impact due to the closure. So this is a way to help them out and get them through at least through the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, can I get a motion for items A through E?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion related to any of the items? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. Treasurer Rigg. Item 3 is Superintendent Nancy House.
Thank you, Mr. Ham. There are two items for approval. Item A is approval of the following policies. The drug testing of students in athletics and extracurricular activities, there was an update. And then the next two are related to updates for family and medical leave and emergency paid sick leave, which are required changes due to COVID-19.
So can we get a motion for item A?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion related to items A, 1, 2, and 3? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Item B is approval of revisions to the 2020-2021 district calendar. As we know, COVID-19 has impacted many, many things. The 9 Claremont County school districts, the superintendents from those 9, plus representatives from Great Oaks, Live Oaks, and Claremont County, we have been meeting to look at plans for restarting and trying to maintain some consistency across the county. Even though our calendars were slightly different, we have determined that everyone is keeping pretty much their same adopted calendar. So we were starting within days of each other, and we are almost all adding additional in-service days to the beginning of the contract for the very much needed additional required teacher training that needs to happen on those days. So the calendar does not change for our staff. They still have 185 days, which is their contract. We are just starting students rather than on August 19th. We are bringing in students for the first day on August 24th. So there would be a lot of front loading of training for additional safety protocols that will be necessary, training on our learning management system so that all teachers and students throughout the district are using Schoology, so there's one platform that's being used if ever there needs to be remote learning again. It will also help communication throughout the school year, even if we're never remote again. There'll be some work around our mental health and wellness standards because we listened and read the surveys, and we know that that is an important part of bringing students back as well. So we need additional days to have our teachers ready to do that. Some of the training in terms of the remote learning is, we had 2 days to go from face-to-face to remote. No one is saying that was even close to perfect. I don't know any school district that is saying that. So right now, we're looking at what remote learning 2.0 would look like so that it's well-planned in case there are rolling closures or there's some reason that everybody has to be remote again. It looks very different, and we need our staff for some extra days to do that. The team here has been planning almost daily on what the training looked like, what's needed. Teachers have been involved, principals have been involved in identifying. So we're asking that the calendar to be amended. In terms of There aren't as many student days, but it's not days that are counted for students anymore, it's hours, and we are well ahead of the hours. So there's not a concern there. We checked all of that out.
Okay. We need a motion to approve item B.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or questions? I'm glad that we reinforced that if we have to do remote learning in the fall, it will look very different than what it looked like in the spring.
Yes, and when I talk about our plans here in a little bit, I want to
Yeah.
emphasize that again, that
Good.
that was a 2-day turnaround.
Yeah. Well, I think at one time we even had talked about having the 16th or the 17th. 17th we were out of buildings because of the election.
Right,
And using the 16th as a potential PD day to get
Right.
our teachers ready for, in case there was some period of remote
Right.
learning. And then
and
everything.
then it happened,
Yeah.
right, so, yeah.
Okay, we need a roll call for item B.
Mr. Morano?
Yes.
Mr. Yucky?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Moving on, there are several informational items. A is the first reading of the following policies, regulations, and exhibits. I will just note that number 7, IKF, graduation requirements. There's actually a 56-page document from the state outlining the new graduation requirements, and Mr. Daniels will, has condensed that, and we'll be going over that later in the meeting. And then there were some other informational items. I'm going to talk briefly about planning for the 2020-2021 school year. Just to reiterate, there's been a tremendous amount of work being done here. Mr. Spicer has been leading think tank meetings since early May, and those brought in teachers, principals, and directors to look at what are all the questions, what are all the things we need to think through, what worked, what didn't work, what training needs to be done. So the first part of that was just generating all of the questions, possibilities before we even moved on. What we know so far, as I said before, in March, given just really 2 days' notice to go from face-to-face classroom teaching to preparing their students for distance learning. We also know that those 11-week students were at home weren't perfect, and it presented challenges for our family. But we want to say, we commend our teachers, we commend our students, we commend our families for making the best of a challenging time. We also know that classroom instruction cannot be replaced by online or distance learning. Like Mr. Spicer said earlier, that the relationship built between teachers and students served as the needed foundation of deeper learning. That is really a core belief here. But we also know that we need to have remote learning 2.0 look differently than it did. So that's part of this planning process. Right now, we're planning really for 3 scenarios. One is that school year opens with all students returning to the building, having as many safety protocols in place. Scenario 2 is planning an online learning option for students who are medically fragile or live with someone who is, and that they would be 100% with an online curriculum with support from teachers. And then the third scenario is people are either online with a digital curriculum or they're back, but then at some point there are rolling closures and everyone has to be remote again. So planning for multiple different scenarios simultaneously. We did survey parents in May and asked them the 2 questions about, given what they know now, do they want their child to return to school in person, online learning, or they just don't know yet. And then we also ask about transportation, and I'll be explaining a little bit more of that later. As Claremont County superintendents, we are meeting and trying to collaborate throughout the county, so there's some similarities as we talk about transportation, safety protocols, how things look, but also knowing that the sizes of the school districts are a significant variable in how we plan as well. What we're hearing now is Tuesday of next week, Governor DeWine will issue any mandates or orders, if any, for schools. So the next step of the planning cannot occur until we know that. And that has been a frustration from superintendents across the state. It's hard to plan without knowing. So that's why we're planning for all the different scenarios. And then once that phase is done, we will be asking parents to provide some information that they've never had. One being, will you need transportation? Because that is going to be the big puzzle. Looking at possibly putting 2 children per seat, which doesn't impact junior high and high school transportation, but it does impact elementary because we tend to put 3 students per seat. But all of the guidance right now is that's probably not a good plan. You need to keep it at 2. So I'll be asking parents, do you plan to do this? Because getting transportation to work is going to be a big puzzle. The other one is asking parents, do you intend to register your child for online learning? So we can staff accordingly for that because it will impact some staff changes. So it's kind of the next phase once we know more.
And can families choose, like you had mentioned, because of medical, internet for medical reasons, but if a family is just not comfortable and would prefer the online learning, they don't need a reason to choose it?
Right, we're going to, but we are going to ask parents that it has to be for a semester.
Right, but you're not.
It can't be back and forth because it'll be a online curriculum because we can't staff for individual or even a small group. And so it'll request that, so, yeah.
Well, we'll have a group of parents that will probably not be ready yet.
Absolutely.
Until we get a little further along with some of the medical research and
Yes.
so forth. You're
Yeah.
going to have parents that are going to be unlikely to want to get back into buildings just yet, and so
Right.
we'll have options for them,
Right,
regardless of whether they have a medical condition.
right.
There's conditions, yeah.
The information is just needed for staffing purposes. Because we may have to shift some staff members as we know what enrollment, whether it's face-to-face or online.
Well, and I would expect that we can reasonably expect that some may also choose to take their children to school and not use our busing system, and having an understanding of what type of number that looks like.
That's
Because you're
why-
going to have 2 issues. One is obviously scheduling buses to make sure we're being as efficient as possible.
Right.
But 2, it's going to increase the traffic on our campuses. And
Yes.
so we'll have to have a good plan to get people in and out.
Yeah.
Particularly, obviously the junior high school is going to be the most challenging one of the bunch.
Yeah.
But even with our elementary schools, having a good protocol to get cars in and out of there efficiently, so.
And I'll share more about transportation and
Okay.
some of the pieces of that puzzle here. Motion to go to D and then go back to C. Just an update on intra-district and open enrollment. We have completed the intra-district enrollment process. That is always completed first. Intra-district is residents, people who live within the school district and are requesting that their child attend an elementary school outside of that neighborhood school boundary. It's a year-to-year process because we can't control who moves into an attendance area in a certain grade level. So a child might be in a 3rd grade class intra-district, wanting to stay 4th grade, but in that neighborhood boundary, all of a sudden 3 families move in with 4th graders, and that puts it over the cap. And we understand that's frustrating to families, but it is impossible to know grade by grade who's going to move into that attendance area. There are class size caps, and it was, the commitment, policy and commitment of the board, we don't add additional staff because that's a significant cost increase. And realistically, we couldn't add additional staff to Boyd Smith and Charles L. Seibelt Elementary School because there's not a classroom to add additional staff. So but that's intra-district, that's done first. And then, once that process is complete, we start the inter-district or open enrollment, which is the same thing. 2 years ago, we started looking at making decisions about grades 3 through 6 in the spring and holding off on K2 to early August. And we learned through looking at trend data that we saw a lot more newly enrolled students moving into the district in late July, August of K1 and 2. So what had happened prior to that, we were accepting like, first grade open enrolled, and then we got people moved into Milford, and then that impacted class sizes. So we wait till early August to do that. Do want to provide an update of grade 3 through 6 for next year. At Boyd E. Smith, there's actually 0 open enrollment. Seipelt, there is 13. Those are all upper grades, like 4, 5, and 6. And looking at the numbers, there won't be any early grades. Seipelt, it is full. And then that will probably follow through. It'll be like Boyd E. Smith. There will not be open enrollment there. McCormick has 17. Meadowview has just 1, and again, because they're at capacity there, that's our largest building. Mulberry has 14, and Pattison has 7. Also a reminder that we have students who live in Milford who open enroll out to other school districts. So our goal is always to have them pretty balanced, because that's a financial impact if it's not balanced. Junior high, 7th grade, there's 18. 8th grade, there's 9. And I will say about our 7th graders, those are students who have been in our elementary schools and they're staying. And it really doesn't impact overall the junior high, because you think about 7th grade English language arts, there's 20 sections of 7th grade English language arts. There's 20 sections of 7th grade math. So those 18 students are spread out through classes. And at the high school, there's 86 total of 2,000 students. Again, so goal is always to have a few more open enrolled in than what's going out.
As a general percentage, how many actually get into open enrollment versus how many apply? Is it a large percentage, or is it a small percentage?
It is, most do, but we're seeing the number drop because as the elementaries are becoming more filled and there are fewer options. So some parents will say, I only want open enrollment to McCormick, and they don't have a section, a second request. So then it's closed. Those who say, I'll take any,
They're more likely to get
yes,
a spot.
yeah.
To what degree do we, are we able to offer open enrollment for the 2nd or 3rd year once they come into the district? I know that it's based on availability and available spaces, but are we fairly successful in bringing some of those same people back, or?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons, Mr. Yaki, that we decided to wait for K1 and 2, because we felt like our goal was to try, once we accepted a student, we would keep that student, even though,
But there's no guarantee.
there's no guarantee. And I will say, it's really tough because a lot of the applications are, the parents are saying, we're both Milford graduates, we loved our education, we want our children to have the same education, we want to open enroll. And I certainly understand that, but the only guarantee is that they're a school district resident. And the reasons that people want to be here is for the exemplary.
Well, and I hear our inventory
education.
of homes right now is fairly low.
Yeah.
It's tough finding a home in the Milford School District, so.
Okay, and then I had just one more, and it's, I'm going to read part of a statement just so I capture it all. I know that I had conversations with a few board members just about our cultural competency focus. I've got some things, and I know Mr. Spicer has some things to share too. As a nation, we're grieving the unjust and senseless loss of life and recent acts of violence against people of color. Our school district does not tolerate hatred, racism, bigotry, violence, or acts of intimidation against any person. And one of the main goals of our district strategic plan is fostering cultural competence. District is fully committed to cultural competence training for our leaders and principals, and we already have had a strong cohort participate in the program offered by the Cincinnati Chamber of Commerce. We have implemented systems to work toward equity and access to educational programs, and have led our principals to professional learning on how to achieve equity and access to educational programs and instructional excellence. Additionally, 3 of our schools already have implemented restorative practices as a key element of equity, relationship healing, and building positive relationships through conversation. I think that's something that's risen to the surface, the importance of talking and conversation and listening. Our portrait of an eagle focuses on helping students learn how to be empathetic to others' perspectives and backgrounds. Every summer, Milford High School students participate in an all-school book read. This summer's novel, which was chosen earlier this spring by teachers and students, it's really awesome what the high school English department does. They have students as beta readers read different books and help them choose what the summer reading is going to be. Is Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. The book's about a young lawyer who founded the Equal Justice Initiative, a nonprofit law office in Montgomery, Alabama, defending the poor, the incarcerated, and the wrongly condemned. Students may read the original text, there's a young adult version, or they can watch the movie or view the TED Talk. These choices are an example of making content accessible to all learners. And I'm inviting and encouraging everyone to join that conversation. It's also important to say that we are grateful for the relationship that our school district has with our local police departments, both Miami Township and Milford City. As superintendent, I have always been grateful, thankful of that relationship, and I know Mr. Spicer will be too. Our local offices are in our school regularly and interact with our students in the community. They care for all of our Milford and Miami Township families, and we know that they're hurt by these senseless tragedies too. This is all a really good start, and we still have a lot of work to do. As a learning organization, we're committed to ongoing learning, and we recognize that listening, truly listening, is part of the learning process. To quote one of my favorite poets, Maya Angelou, do the best you can until you know better, then when you know better, do better. I'm gonna get personal for a minute. As a mom of 2 Latina daughters, I've become increasingly aware of the biases they experienced growing up and now as an adult. I've gotta do better as a mom too. I hope and pray that their horrific deaths are a watershed and we commit more deeply to listening to one another and creating hope for all. We know as educators that one of the greatest tragedies is when children lose hope, and we can't let that happen. In 1993, my first year, I'd been teaching in other places before I came here, but my first year teaching in Milford, all staff were required to complete what was then called diversity training. I respectfully suggest to Mr. Spicer, to the board, to consider possibly something similar for staff. You know, today the terminology is more like cultural competence, and there's some great programs out there. So I'm going to share that, and now Mr. Spicer had some things he wanted to say too.
Thank you, Mrs. House. President Ham, members of the board, I'm really looking forward to continuing our work with the Cincinnati Chamber and building cultural competence for leaders. As Nancy mentioned, we had some leaders attend in the fall of 2019 in that cohort. I did reach out today. The person is furloughed right now, so hopefully Rob Dunn will have a phone number maybe that I can actually, a cell number, and get in touch with her. And so we're looking forward to starting another cohort here in the fall of 2020. You know, it's really important for our leaders to be able to have this shift in their cultural perspective and adapt their behaviors and communication. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm very pleased that Nancy mentioned restorative practices. You know, we brought restorative practices here. We have 2 schools right now where 90+% of the staff is trained in restorative practices, and also the Success Academy. And we also have some teachers that have been trained as trainers, including myself and some other central office staff. So we're looking forward to continuing that as well. If I may add, as Nancy did, a personal note, my youngest son is adopted from China. And, as Nancy said, that you come across sometimes that you don't realize that, I think they identify as being white, perhaps, at least mine does, because he's so young. But one time we were having a conversation with him about who he was eating lunch with. Who'd you eat lunch with today? I was thinking most of the parents, who'd you eat lunch with today? And he was talking about all the different kids, said all of their names, and I knew who the students were. And he was sitting at the brown table. All the brown kids were sitting together. And I don't know, it struck a chord for me. And so I just think that we need to, as Nancy said, continue to make sure that we have equity and access and opportunities to learn for all of our students. And I'm looking forward to continuing that work that Nancy has started. Thank you.
And I'd like to add, as a parent too, not that you necessarily have to respond, but, I'm looking at my kids too. We have both the social distancing, stay at home. My daughter was almost in tears today because she didn't want to go to Target. I thought that would be a special outing for her, and she's scared to leave,
Yes.
And so I'm like, we have to go back to school, so that piece of it. And then there's also this inclusion and acceptance in the community when so much is bubbling up right now. So as a parent, I would also appreciate that, that's great that the principals and leaders in the school are getting it, but if it can also be brought out some way to our level as a community member, as a parent to a child who is like, what the heck's going on in the world right now, kind of thing.
And that's a great idea, is that the team's planning for, it would be wrapped around also the mental health and wellness part of returning, but how does this look in classrooms, and then how can resources be shared with parents? I think there was more of an awareness.
Yeah, I've had great questions from parents or from teachers in the past, like, this is what we talked today, ask your kids today about blah, 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 just as thought starter, because you get that, what'd you do at school during nothing, what'd you do with no one, so if there were some of those thought starters, that those conversations could be continued at home by us, because I also don't know how to talk about it for them.
I would agree. It's a work in progress for all of us, and I've certainly learned that along the way. And I've said it to the board before that many times we think that love is enough, but it's really just an entry point, and it's what we do above and beyond that for our students, staff, and families.
Thank you. Nancy, if you could just maybe briefly talk a little bit about some of the guidelines we're using to open things up this summer for our extracurriculars and our sports, based upon Ohio High School Athletic Association really has provided those guidelines, and we're following those as long as our local health department.
Right, it was a phase-in, 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks, and no more than 10, and with the same group all the time is how it started. So one day, this group couldn't be together, and then mixed up with the next day that it all has to do with the contact tracing and exposure. Simple things like water fountains had to be closed down. Athletes, participants had to bring their own water, so.
Well, that's good, but the great thing is slowly,
Yes,
under guidelines, we're getting kids back onto our campuses.
yes.
Back into, to some extent, our buildings,
Yeah.
to begin physical activity, to begin other things, that they've missed for several months. And so we're slowly following those guidelines to make sure that they kind of get started. And
Yes.
with the assumption, too, that we're going to have a sort of a normal fall under a set of guidelines as well. So they're able to start training for whatever the activity that they're involved in.
From kind of a teaching learning perspective, we have nearly 2,000 students at the high school and 1,100 at the junior high. It's great that there's going to be this cohort of students who've already been through many of the safety protocols, and it will just be second nature that this is, they will know those things because they've worked with their coaches and their directors on things. So our athletic directors did a fantastic job of having coaches and directors prepared. And then Dan Yeager, our director of Fine Arts and Extracurricular, the same thing.
That's great. Okay, any other questions, discussion? We're going to move on to Human Resources, Superintendent Nancy House.
Thank you, Mr. Ham. The following certified items for approval, items A through D.
We need a motion for items A through D.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Have the following classified items for approval, items A through H. I do always want to point out, because it's not a common name, that the person with the same last name as me is not related in any way. She's probably very thankful.
Okay, so we need a motion for approval of items A through H.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Here are the following supplemental duty, pupil activity, and consultant items for approval. And I always want to point out, item A is non-renewal of pupil activity supervisor contracts. This is only procedural. These are non-teaching or staff, so this is procedural to do this.
Okay, we need a motion for item A.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Question or discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
I will note on that number 30 was Earl Wilson, who has still been working as a site supervisor. Following miscellaneous item for approval. Item A is approval, a maximum of 10 extended days to the current contract for Terry Krasinski, Central Office Administrative Assistant Supervisor. I do want to explain this. Mrs. Krasinski is the superintendent's administrative assistant. She is retiring as of June 30th. She was willing to come back for some extended days so that I would have some support in July. That will also, Mr. Spicer's will be in the process of hiring her replacement, so it will allow them to have some cross-training during that time. So that is the reason for that.
You and Terry were actually a box set, right?
Yes.
There you go.
Yep.
Well, and this will be one of the more challenging Julys in recent memory.
Yeah.
Between the COVID-19 issue and the transition, it's going to be really important for you to have that support, so.
Yeah.
Okay. We need a motion for the approval of item A.
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes. Moving on to business and operations, Superintendent Nancy House.
Thank you, President Ham. I just want to share some transportation considerations for next year, just to have open conversation about this. In terms of transportation to non-public schools, the plan right now is to not transport to schools that are outside the 30-minute requirement. Of course, there are schools that the district has never transported to because they're well beyond the 30-minute. Schools that newly fall into that category based on last year's, or earlier this year's Ohio Department of Education timings are Moeller High School, Ursuline High School, Mount Notre Dame High School, and McNicholas High School. Anything outside of 30 minutes really creates a single tier route, which means that bus can only be used for that route all morning or all afternoon. That is really the rationale behind 30 minutes. And as I get through all of this, it's going to become apparent why we need every single bus that we have available, as many tiers as possible. Next month, be looking at the board possibly deeming impractical to transport students where there are very, very few requests to an individual school. So they're within 30 minutes, but there may only be 4 students. So that is what is meant by practical versus impractical. Is it practical to run a route for 60 to 80 to 90,000 with 4 students on the route? So that's, and by law, it has to be individual names, but just as Ohio Revised Code. A third consideration is there are some non-public schools where it's not impractical. There may be 35 students whose parents requested transportation. As attendance was taken this year, realizing that there may have been 30, 35 requests, but there were usually 6 to 8 students on the bus. So it's a communication that once a student doesn't ride the bus for an extended period of time, they're taken off the route. And if that leaves only 4 to 5 students, then the board has the option of deeming that impractical too, because you have to ask, is it worth running a bus with 4 to 5 students? And then finally, part of this big picture is transportation with COVID-19. More than likely, we're going to be able to put 2 students to a seat. You know, the original guidance was 1 to a seat, which really would have made transportation impossible. 2 to a seat, as I said, for junior high and high school is how we do it now. Elementary is 3, so it is going to cause some, I think, looked at today, there's at least 12 buses that would be over capacity with 2 to a seat. That's one of the reasons we're gonna ask parents, please tell us if you need transportation. And some have already said, if it helps, I will transport my child. Some things about transportation also is that there's gonna have to be a seating chart. Children will have to sit in an assigned seat. And attendance will have to be taken every day, and that is for contact tracing. The health department has already said that that responsibility of a health department doesn't change. They've always been responsible for contact tracing, and they still will. So they will, if someone tests positive, they will need to know any students who, any other people who were in contact more than 15 minutes within 6 feet. So that's the reason for attendance and seating charts. So all of those things together, it's gonna be really, really tight planning for transportation. And it's not just the idea of getting more buses. There aren't more buses out there to have. And then even training additional bus drivers is something that every district in Ohio is working through. So I just wanted to share all of that, looking at all of those pieces coming together on transporting children to school.
Well, just to clarify, when we deem a route impractical, we're doing so because the ridership is low. And typically the standard, the guideline that we've used in the past and what's been passed down from the ODE is 15. 15 seems to be the number.
Yes.
So when the question is, if we're looking to deem a route or a school impractical for this coming school year, are we gonna have enough time to give the families to make adjustments, knowing that they will not be in that route, or give them a heads up before our next board meeting where we would have to pass some sort of resolution to deem them impractical?
My recommendation is at the July board meeting, if there are 4 students who have requested transportation to school A, and only 4, that you deem those, because you're deeming by law individual students' names.
Yes.
And that's because if the parent applies, there's a payment that they get.
They get a payment in lieu of transportation?
Yes, yeah, so that's the part of the reason of the name, that you do that at the July board meeting.
Okay, so do we have a cutoff with those that are requesting transportation? for
There
these
was a
days?
cutoff in May,
So it's already cut off?
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, 'cause if we don't do it in July, we're right back to where we were last year when I was sitting out there.
Right,
And, we had a lot of unhappy people because they didn't get notified in time.
yeah, and that was, as horrific as that was, it really was also one of those things that brought to light a lot of process and procedural things that,
Where we could do better.
and, they had been in place for a very long time, and we needed to clean it up. And that was part of the work that we did this year.
So I guess the question is, for those that we know right now, since we already have numbers associated with these different routes, can we give some kind of pre-notice that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That gives them a little bit more time to make other arrangements.
Yes.
And also to file for the payment in lieu of
Right.
transportation.
Right.
Although I don't think they get that money until
The end of,
the end of the year.
right, they have to show that they stayed there.
Yeah, we paid, for the students this year, we paid that in June, so after the school year was over.
Okay,
So.
okay, great.
And I will also say in terms of communication, during the school year, when the timings were done for the 4 schools that are outside the 30-minute limit, letters were sent to families at that time. Some people still went ahead and requested transportation. So the request was made, or we asked that communication be sent out again, that, nothing has changed. It's still outside 30 minutes.
And we don't have to reimburse the
No.
outside 30-minute people.
Right.
It's the inside deemed impractical.
Yes.
Yes.
So we would expect them to apply, even though they may know they won't. They have to apply, like request, right, so that they have a letter that says we deemed you impractical.
Yes.
And then we can pay
Yep,
them. Reimburse.
yes.
And just to clarify, the challenge with high schools versus elementary schools is that the times, if you're in junior high and high school, to another junior high or high school, has to be from our high school campus. our
Right.
Junior high school campus. If they're going to an elementary school, they have to be timed from the local, whatever their elementary school would have been.
Right,
To whatever elementary school they're going to. And
Correct.
So it requires a lot more timings.
Yes.
For that to happen. So
Yeah.
somebody may wonder why, well, you've deemed this high school beyond 30 minutes, but there's an elementary school around the corner that's not deemed that way yet.
Right.
Part of it was we weren't able to get through it because things shut down, right?
right, correct. And there's also the variable of start times for high schools tend to be in the midst of the heaviest traffic of the day, and that impacts timings as well, whereas with an elementary, it's often after the morning traffic.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to curriculum instruction and assessment. Superintendent Nancy House.
Items for approval, items A through E. E is exciting to see, asking for approval, some water polo field trips.
Yeah. Okay, we have a motion for the approval of items A through E.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions, conversation, comments? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. Next on the item, on the agenda is informational items for curriculum and instruction and assessment. Do you want to introduce Mr. Paul Daniels?
Yes, So noted before, Ohio Department of Education issued a 56-page document on graduation requirements, pretty complex. Mr. Daniel was able to take that and condense that tremendously. I want to commend him for the hours and hours of work and the creativity around some of the unique graduation requirements as well.
Good evening. It's actually very nice to present in person, so it's good to see you all. A very condensed version. We will place all of this presentation as well as the guiding document for our families on the website so they can just understand the complexity of what's needed to be done. So thank you for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here. The graduation requirements will cover 3 areas, and it's easiest to understand it as one is it's how you earn those credits. So that's been pretty standard over the years that the state of Ohio has said in order for us to issue a diploma, students have to have these minimum academic requirements. And so these do not change. We have 4. Every student will leave high school with 4 language arts credits, half credit of health, 4 credits of mathematics, half a credit of PE, 3 credits of science, 3 social studies credits, and 5 electives. In the first reading tonight of IKF, we actually reduced our graduation requirements from 21 to 20 to match the state. I don't want anyone to think in the community that we're actually lowering our expectations. That's not the case. We're just finding in this era of uncertainty, the more things that we do alike, the less challenges that we have later on. So 471 of our 491 seniors had 22 or more credits when they left us. So it's not going to affect our students in any way, but it just puts us in line with our, we do share students through open enrollment as was talked about, and we do have transfer students. So we want to make that level playing field for them. So that will be our first part of this. You earn these 20 credits, and that's part 1. Part 2 is how you show competency. Up until this point, and it still is this way, so our current juniors and seniors who will start the year still play that game of points. I take my 7 end of course exams, and I have to have X number of points. For our current sophomores, that's 2023 and beyond that, 2024, they have to take 6 assessments, but only 2 are gatekeeping courses. So every student will earn either a passing score or a competency score. So you must pass Algebra 1 or demonstrate competency, and that usually will happen for our students in grades 8 or 9. And then English 2 will happen for all of our students in 10th grade. So you will pass that. So if you think about the 3rd grade guarantee, it's very similar. There's a passing score of 700, give or take, and then they set another score that says competency. So a passing score is what you'll see on the report card, the percentage of students who actually pass what will be on the report card. But each of our individual students, if they came within that 10 points of passing, then they're deemed competent and they're good to go. So if you do not pass these tests, these are the other 3 ways that you can demonstrate competency. Option 1 is a career focus. So we have a credential here. We instituted the hospitality and tourism credential, so that meets that. We got that on board in the last 18 months. We successfully, with Rob Hatfield, our associate principal at the Success Academy, Liz Emmons, our college career counselor, and with Mrs. Berkeley, our Director of Student Services, were able to do that simultaneously in the high school and at the Success Academy. So we ran our students through that program. They earned their 12 points. That will help us. We want to add a health credential, and we're going down that road to figure out how to do that. We don't give WebEx exams. That's usually tied to a program at Great Oaks. So if you are in a trade or something that the state has certified as a program, you take a WebEx exam, and then a pre-apprenticeship or acceptance into an approved apprenticeship program. That is something we'll need to explore. What can support that is a work-based learning experience. We do give the Work Keys exam. I do want to caution you, still to this day, I cannot find the passing score for Work Keys in the document. I'm not sure it's been set. It's usually been, for the current juniors and seniors, 14, and that's a combination of workplace documents. Those are documents if you went right into the workforce, like your employee manual, your onboarding with HR, instructions, all those documents that are important for you to be knowledgeable about your job. That's what we would consider workplace documents. Graphics, there's a workplace graphics, looking at those, and then there is a section of computation, what the basic skills that you would need to be proficient in the workforce in the math realm. So we have the workplace documents, the graphic literacy, and then the computation, and that's usually about a 14. It has been, but the score isn't in there. And then we will and have been doing the Ohio Means Jobs Readiness Seal. So if you can't pass the test, that's option 1. A lot of discussion about option 2, and I want to be very clear that we will not over-counsel any child into the military. That is a personal choice made with the family and that student. There was a lot of discussion when we were attending roundtables that you're prescribing or you're going to over-encourage. That's a personal choice, and for those students who do enlist and bring us evidence of that enlistment, they then meet competency. And then the third option, which is, I will tell you personally, a struggle for me, is College Credit Plus. You can earn a credit, down at UC Claremont or through a participating college. But for me, if you cannot demonstrate competency in Algebra 1, it's a big leap for you to go down and take a CCP course. And I think we're seeing some alignment with that with our partners. And our number of students in CCP is actually declining. It's just not been what all of us thought it would be. So it's a big leap, and that was another discussion. How do you go from not being able to pass Algebra 1 to being able to enroll into a CCP course? It's just a leap. So part 1 was the credits. Part 2 is passing the test. I do want to tell you, we're still going to see on our report card biology. It is a test that students will take, but now they don't necessarily need to pass to graduate. We'll also see American government and American history. And there's some debate about geometry. The No Child Left Behind waiver for Ohio still says we must issue geometry or math too, even though, so we're having tests on our report card now that may not have the same meaning for children. So that's a concern for me as a curriculum director, that will be measured on something that's really not required to graduate. It does help them with their seals though. So part 3 is you must earn 2 of the following diploma seals. So choosing those that line up with your goals and interests, these seals give you the chance to demonstrate academic, technical, and professional skills and knowledge that align to your passions, interests, and plans next steps after high school. So you probably noticed the first seal is Ohio Means Job. It was on the last screen, so it counts twice. It counts in both places, and then again, you earned an industry-recognized credential seal, which hospitality and tourism is. It counts in both places. The College Ready seal, the Military Enlistment seal, again, both of those qualify in both areas. When I mentioned the American government and the U.S. history, you'll see the citizenship seal. If you pass both of those, or you take AP U.S. history or AP Gov and get a 3, 4, or 5, you earn that seal. Same thing for the science seal. If you take bio and you pass that test, or you take AP Bio or any AP Chem, AP Physics, algebra-based, or any of those courses, that will get you the science seal. There are the honors diploma seals, which we've always issued honors diplomas. Now you get a seal for it. The seal of biliteracy. There's a technology seal. Those are all the criteria for those live with the state of Ohio. So they tell us how a child earns that seal. The bottom 3 seals, the community service seal, the fine and performing arts seal, and the student engagement seal, are defined here by the LEA, the local education agency. That's our board-approved seals that we're going to present to you. We did move to a larger diploma this year. One of the reasons was every seal that you earn currently by law must be placed on your diploma, and it's also listed on your transcript. Speaking with Lisa Hare, our director of EMIS, we are finally starting to see some of the reporting of this and how we can capture it. So that's starting to come through because this is a lot of data management. We were pulling test scores in before with points. Now we're pulling in maybe 10 data points, I think, for the tech seal. So that's just a lot of reporting and a lot of cross-referencing. We will link for the families a 56-page document so they can dig in if they really want to learn about what you need to do to get an honors diploma seal or a technology seal, they can dig into that. So per policy, local boards of education are given the authority to define the following seals. They are the community service seal, the fine and performing arts seal, and the student engagement seal. We're choosing or to recommend to you that we do all three. So I think that's important for our students. For the community service seal, we're recommending that throughout a high school experience, the students complete 15 hours in 3 different locations. To keep that in mind, we already offer the Jefferson seal, and that's 20 hours in one location over a year, and then the presidential seal, which is 100 hours. We really saw some of this in Central Ohio, the 3 different locations. We thought it would be, it would allow students to participate with civic organizations within their community, multiple organizations, and maybe it will help them develop a passion down the road for that organization and their cause, because that's really what it's about. When you're earning the seal, it's about being prepared, but also if you go back to our Portrait of Eagle competencies, it's about continuing to learn as part of our community. And we'll do that during their high school experience, so that would be through grades 9 through 12, and their hours must be logged in and turned into the appropriate coordinating adult at Milford High School. This could be this could be done as easily as we do the physical education credit or how you get that credit for participating. It's a piece of paper that an adult signs off, your coach, your sponsor, the organization, and the counselors can categorize that and keep a record of that.
Paul, can I ask you a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
Will we qualify community service organizations that they will?
We did not think about pre-approval. We don't typically, I'll let Nancy go.
Well, I'm thinking along the lines of Chris Ham's yard work.
That's what.
You understand what I'm saying?
Well,
I was senior class advisor and then high school administrator during the time that we did required community service for graduation, and we had to really define it because otherwise it was doing Mr. Ham's yard work for him to a nonprofit and had to be identified as a nonprofit.
So a tax identified nonprofit.
Right,
Okay.
right. It could not be. And even at the time, there were things like, well, I'm on the high school basketball team and I help with youth camp. And our response was, you're helping with youth camp because you're on the high school basketball team and that is part of your commitment to the overall program. This is about true community service going out to the greater community.
Well, I'm thinking that the other side of what helps in sort of qualifying a list of community partners is it also, they can identify themselves as a Milford school partner in this
Yes.
as well,
Yeah.
and have recognition regarding that.
That's a great idea. That's.
yeah, I made a note for us to when
Okay.
we create the document that tax identified nonprofit, I think would be probably the most equitable way to do that.
Well, you could even develop some kind of decal or something that the operation that you're working with would identify on their website or on their door that we are a community service seal partner with Milford Schools, something along those lines.
It kind of reminds me of the work readiness seal where you have to have that sponsor fill out that, you have your workplace sponsor fill out those items. We could mimic it off of that.
Yeah.
That's a great suggestion.
Is it only 3 locations or minimum?
We actually said, we defined it as being 3 distinct different places.
Because I've just seen a junior honor society, you need so many hours, and it's like an hour here, an hour here, an hour here, like I didn't know if it was that piece.
Yeah, if they wanted to do, multiple places, we just see value in in being able to go in different places in our community. And again, this is a personal choice. If this is a passion of the students, they'll earn this seal. What I like about it is it's not something we're mandating to give or make every child do. It's a personal choice to earn this seal. So I think that makes a difference too. The second one is our Fine and Performing Arts seal, and our proposed requirement is that it would be 3 years of participation in a school-sanctioned course, such as band, choir, visual arts, etc., and then you participate in one sanctioned competition, such as OMEA Solo and Ensemble, or the Scholastic Art and Writing Competition. And again, must be completed during a student's high school experience. All activities would need to be signed off on by a teacher, and hours must be logged and turned into the appropriate coordinating adult at Milford High School. Again, it could be mirrored right after that physical education form that our students who are involved in activities can fill out.
Paul, just as a quick question, that is 3 years in one area, not 1 year in 3 areas.
We define that as 3 years in one area.
Okay.
Because we wanted to be done with fidelity and didn't want it to be watered down. It wanted to be a commitment that you showed that if you presented, if you did not choose at that moment to go to a 2 or 4 year institution and you were going right into the workforce, you could show with your diploma that you had maintained and completed 3 years of participating in an organization, which lines up perfectly with our competencies. So that's why it was intentional that way.
Okay.
That's a great question. I appreciate that.
I believe I asked that question in a committee, and I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on it.
Yes, and you will see actually the same thing on the engagement seal. So this is the criteria that we'll put in place for Fine and Performing Arts, and then similarly, your student engagement seal is 3 consecutive years of participation in a school-sanctioned club sport or activity again. We didn't want it to be, oh my goodness, I didn't show competency, it's my senior year, let me load up on 3 clubs. We have never, and I hope we never become a diploma factory. And we want our seals to mean something, just like a Milford diploma means something. So it's just like we're gonna have students who work really hard each year for the 100 hours of the presidential seal for volunteering in our community, in community service. We want students to equally show that, you know, that could be almost 300 hours if you do 3 years of easily of marching band or more. And that shows to employers, it shows on your college application, it shows to the military that you are, that you have a level of commitment, and that means something. So again, must be completed during a high school experience. All activities need to be signed off by a coach or an advisor, and participation is defined as a full year, and students will not receive credit if they are removed or quit attending the required participation. And again, we have to find log the hours. So those are the 3 that, we put in IKF that we would, we had 1 reading tonight. It will be the 2nd reading in July. But what we need to do now is that, beginning with the current freshmen, we will need to create an individualized graduation plan for them. We work with a vendor. Every student at the high school has access to Naviance. This will be inside a Naviance. We have to be more intentional about making sure this is done and documented. And then for every student that does not pass Algebra 1 or English 2, they must have an academic success plan in place, and we must load that into the database, the EMIS database, similarly that we would load a student's gifted plan, their individual education plan, their 504. It gets loaded in there because we have to demonstrate that we've communicated with the parent, that we've given some remediation, we've helped that student with the skills that they need, and that we've given them the opportunity to test. The law is very clear, though, that we only must test a student 1 time, additionally, after that first time. If you are deemed to be, if you demonstrate competency, you're done. So that's a win. We did a short study, found 90% of our students would meet competency on the first testing opportunity. That's good. I think we found between 36 and 40 would not, and that lowers the number of retest, and it also lowers the number of students who will have some academic stress about not graduating because they have other pathways. And then we'll still need to work on behind the scenes on the sign-off, the data management, and capturing each seal in EMIS, and we're working through that. It's starting to come through. It's complex. I would bet probably my paycheck that the opening of school will be less complex than the graduation plan, even though we would want them to be opposite in this situation. But it's very well defined. We'll see how it plays out. And we just wanted to make sure that the local seals were as important and the criteria were demonstrated longevity and commitment. So that's all I have. And then for our parents and community members, when they link on the presentation, they can see the the graphic that condenses everything down.
Mr. Daniels, thank you very much. I think you clarified all of that in a very succinct way. You mentioned the new health credential that we'll be offering in addition to the hospitality and tourism credential. And Paul mentioned that whole team that put that together a couple years ago. Would you briefly describe what the health credential, what that means?
All right, so we're looking at an entry point. It's an entry point into the health field. So you think about it is an opportunity that allows students to go into an entry position. I don't want to use the wrong term, but I always think of the health tech that comes into the room, comes in hourly, checks your temperature, checks your vitals. What we believe is that if, based on the shortage in our area of those type of RNs, and you always go by some of our facilities and see help wanted, that we're also working with local agencies that will tell us if you can bring us somebody and they have this credential, then we can onboard them and help pay for or financially stand behind them as they move up and earn more certifications and earn their degree. So, it's a great entry point. We know that is the field in this area or in our country that's booming. One of the challenges is that we're working with ODE is that the curriculum that or the partner agency they've used does not have it as well defined as the hospitality and tourism. So we've applied for it, we've been approved for it, but we haven't found the correct pieces. And we want to make sure that when we have a student earn that credential, that it has the Milford name, that it means that this student is ready and they're going to be a great asset to your company. So that's really where we're going next. Because we realize if we put we're currently putting every student that's having challenges graduating and meeting the points into hospitality and tourism. But in order to be better, we have to have multiple pathways. And we have our partnership with the Oaks, so if it's something that they don't want to do there, then they have the opportunity to do that here.
Well, it's great to see that I know we're based upon the graduation requirements that are at the state level, but this has forced us to look at things a little bit differently and give options to our students that need to graduate based upon those requirements. And what I think has happened with that is it's gone beyond the options. It's actually provided this really amazing opportunity to get involved in some things that normally we wouldn't have had here at the schools.
But we've always had, the state's always had an honors diploma, but the seals that are the same, a technology diploma, a fine arts, or not a technology seal, a fine arts seal, part of that's excellence in an area doesn't have to look the same for every child. That, when I look at the artwork or hear some of our musicians perform, their work is exemplary and they should receive recognition the same as someone who excels in a traditional academic program. So it's great to see that.
And there are many examples of alumni today that have went on to become very successful in certain areas, and maybe they were very challenged in a typical school setting, but they become brilliant human beings in many different areas.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to move on back to Board of Education and our second public participation. Do we have any speakers?
No.
No speakers. Our next regular board meeting will be July 16th of 2020 at 7 p.m. right here. And we'll get to item C, which is any discussion. Any final comments from our board or from our superintendent or our treasurer?
I am missing seeing the artwork and seeing Mr. Yeager in here, and I'm looking forward to the day that we have our students come in here and we get to shake their hands and see what they're actually accomplishing. So looking forward to that.
Absolutely agree with you. And I feel the worst for Dan Yeager than anybody in the district during this thing because he was everywhere. And sort of things just shut down. So hopefully we get Dan back and bounce around and as excited as he was before. Good.
Hopefully we can get everything back to normal.
I hope so too. We'll cross our fingers.
And hopefully the community will be patient until we hear from what the governor has to say and have an opportunity to tweak our programs and then roll them out for them to see.
Right.
Hopefully they will.
And but kept emphasizing, there's a tremendous amount of work being done by many, many people. It's planning for everything without knowing the details and what will be in our control, decision-wise, and what will not be.
Yeah, and we really need to say that because I know the people that are sitting up here at this table are very keenly aware of that, but the community is, you know, they just don't know what's
Right.
going on in the background until it's presented.
Right.
And hopefully they're going to be patient and they're going to be able to be supportive as we do roll out what we've got, so.
And it's gonna change. We all know it's not, whatever we hear next week is gonna,
Right.
we're gonna keep learning and keep growing and.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be a very fluid plan, so.
Good. With that, we need a motion to adjourn for the evening.
Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.